The Meanest Doll in the World by Anne Martin and Laura Goodwin. Chapter 17. Mean Mimi Meets Her End. Annabelle didn't speak to Tiffany for an entire week, and she spoke as little as possible to Auntie Sarah. She had intended not to speak to her at all, but living in such close quarters made that difficult. Anyway, Annabelle was angrier with Tiffany than with Auntie Sarah. She understood why Auntie Sarah might not want her to go along on explorations. She was disappointed, but she understood. Tiffany, however, had betrayed Annabelle. Annabelle did not understand that, and she thought it was unforgivable. That long, lonely week was even worse for Annabelle than the many years before she had had a best friend. No best friend at all was better than a best friend who had become a traitor. Annabelle spent hours lying on her bed, thinking and remembering. She remembered the first time she had met Tiffany, when the fun crafts in their dream house had been delivered to the Palmers, a large cardboard carton. She remembered reading Auntie Sarah's diary with Tiffany and forming Selm. She remembered when Tiffany told her that if she had a friendship necklace, she would share it with Annabelle. Ha, thought Annabelle. If I had that necklace now, I'd give it right back to Tiffany. After I had scratched traitor on her half, best traitor. During this miserable week, Annabelle kept track of the times mean Mimi was spotted in Kate's room. 4 visits in all. Once to call to Kate again while she slept. Once to make another nighttime mess on the floor in Kate's room. Once to deposit a cat toy in the doll's parlor. They managed to hide it before Kate noticed it. And once to announce to Annabelle that she, Princess Mimi, was Tiffany Funcraft's new best friend. The dolls grew afraid that their secret life might be exposed at any moment, and that they would be able to do nothing about it. Good idea, Annabelle, said Bobby crossly one night. Doing nothing about Mean Mimi is working just great. Annabelle felt equally cross. As if trapping her was a good idea, she replied. Children, Auntie Sarah called softly from her room. Please. Oh, be quiet, muttered Annabelle, but not so that anyone could hear her. That was on a Monday night. On Tuesday night, there was no sign of Mimi. She's probably in Nora's room torturing the phone crafts, thought Annabelle. Or maybe she's whispering with Tiffany, her new best friend. But on Wednesday night, there was no sign of Mimi either, nor on Thursday night, nor on Friday night. Do you suppose maybe she's gone? Ventured Papa, after Kate had fallen asleep. Do you think she's left, perhaps for good? It's possible, replied Mamma. I guess anything is possible. How could she leave? Asked Nanny. Annabelle thought of her conversation in the attic with Tiffany, of the idea of Mimi walking boldly down the street in the big outside world of humans. She didn't want to frighten her family, so she said, maybe she decided to go back to BJ's house. Maybe she decided she had punished Tiffany and me enough, and she left for school in Kate's backpack. Punished you? Repeated Auntie Sarah. Annabelle wouldn't look at her aunt, but she said, yes, we ruined her life at BJ's house. I think maybe she followed us here to teach us a lesson, but she didn't plan to stay. Annabelle's family looked both hopeful and thoughtful. That would mean, said Mamma, that she's making life miserable again for Cowley's dolls. Maybe and maybe not, Annabelle answered. She doesn't have much control over them anymore. But Annabelle knew that Mean Mimi could still be dangerous to dolls everywhere. Perhaps, said Uncle Doll, our lives can return to normal now. Saturday afternoon was raw and rainy, with an autumn wind that whistled around the corners of the Palmer's house, rattling the windows and creeping through cracks. Kate closed herself into her room, curled up on the bed, covered herself with a blanket, and began reading Half Magic. Ordinarily, Annabelle would have enjoyed a day like this, all cozy and quiet, with Kate nearby. But Nora had been secretly playing in the doll's house that morning and had left Tiffany and her parents in the parlor with Annabelle. Mom and Dad Funcraft were lying on the floor. Annabelle and Tiffany were sitting jammed together in an armchair. Each had quietly pinched the other 5 times already. And before Kate had entered the room, Annabelle had whispered to Tiffany, "Traitor," and Tiffany had replied, "Liar." Now Annabelle could neither pinch nor whisper, not with Kate so close at hand. But she could feel anger bubbling inside of her. And imagine she could feel Tiffany's anger bubbling as well. Annabelle tried to concentrate on Kate. She wished Nora would come into the room so that Kate would read aloud to her. Then she wished that Kate would leave so Annabelle could pinch Tiffany again. Then she forgot about Kate and began a list of all the things she hated about Tiffany. Number 1 on her list was, she's a traitor. So were numbers 2 and 3. Annabelle was working on number 4 when she thought she saw movement on the floor near the head of Kate's bed. She glanced to the left, and what she saw made her eyes widen. She wondered if Tiffany saw it too, and she tried to send a silent message to her. Look to the left. Look to the left. Creeping out from under Kate's bed was Mean Mimi. She paused and peered up at the bedspread hanging over the side. Then she crossed the room to Kate's bookshelf. Just ran through the room with Kate lying there right on the bed. Annabelle couldn't stand it any longer. She was going to have to break a teeny little rule herself. She wanted to make sure she wasn't the only person watching what was going on. So she nudged Tiffany and twisted slightly to look at her. Tiffany gave Annabelle the smallest of nods. Then, as the girls turned their attention back to Mimi, Tiffany slid her hand into Annabelle's. And that is how they sat and watched the most frightening and most amazing thing either of them had ever seen or has ever seen since. Mimi ran to Kate's bookcase and began to climb up it. She was no more than 10 feet in front of Kate. If Kate had so much as glanced up from Half Magic, she would have seen a small doll in a princess costume climbing swiftly up her bookcase, using the books themselves as stepping stones toward the top. Please don't look up, please don't look up, Kate, Annabelle chanted silently, and she felt Tiffany's grip tighten around her hand. When Mimi reached the 4th shelf from the bottom, she turned around and stood on a paperback book that was lying on its side, stood and faced Kate Palmer. Kate! Mimi called, and Annabelle cringed to hear how loudly Mimi could shout. Kate heard her, which didn't surprise Annabelle, but scared her nevertheless. And as Kate looked up from her book, 2 things happened at the very same time. Mean Mimi leaped from the shelf, and the door to Kate's room was flung open as Nora entered. Kate turned around to glare at Nora and said sternly, "Nora, how many times have I told you to knock first?" But Nora only pointed at mean Mimi and screamed, "That dolly! She jumped on your bookshelf! I saw her! I saw her!" Kate looked at the floor, where mean Mimi was now lying motionless, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. "Oh, Nora," she said. "She couldn't have jumped. She must have fallen somehow." Annabelle knew that Kate hadn't actually seen Mimi jump. She had heard someone call her name, and then Nora had burst into her room. Still, Kate slid off her bed very slowly, and when she bent to examine mean Mimi, she was frowning. "She jumped! She jumped!" Nora was crying. "She couldn't have," Kate repeated, but she picked Mimi up gingerly, holding the edge of her sleeve between her thumb and her forefinger. "She did! I saw her!" "Nora, stop that," said Kate. But Annabelle thought she sounded nervous rather than cross. "Please, be quiet." Nora stopped talking. She sniffled and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Whose doll is this anyway?" asked Kate, still allowing Mimi to dangle from her fingers. "I don't know," replied Nora, who sounded as if she might start to cry again. "I don't have a princess doll." Kate dropped Mimi on her desk and led Nora to the bed. "Don't worry about it," she said kindly. "Here, look at this book. I just started it. It's all about magic, and it's really good. I'll read to you for a while." Kate and Nora sat together on the bed for a long time. Annabelle didn't take her eyes off Mimi. She barely even listened to the story. But although she stared at Mimi for half an hour while Kate read to Nora, and then for another 3 hours as the afternoon dragged on, she didn't see Mimi so much as blink. Annabelle stared at Mimi while the Palmers ate their dinner downstairs. She stared at her during the stormy fall evening while the Palmers talked on the phone and watched television. And Kate and Nora took their baths and got ready for bed. Kate had been asleep for a full hour when Annabelle dared to stir. She turned to Tiffany and whispered, "I haven't seen Mimi move. Have you?" "Nope." Slowly, the rest of the dolls joined Annabelle and Tiffany and Mom and Dad Funcraft in the parlor. They stared down at Mimi. Several of them had seen her jump. Those who hadn't listened to Kate and Nora and figured out some of what had happened. Annabelle and Tiffany filled them in on the rest. "And she hasn't moved since Nora saw her land on the floor," Annabelle said at last. "She's definitely in doll state." Uncle Doll said thoughtfully, "Could anyone see Kate's clock when Mimi jumped?" "I could," said Tiffany. "It was about 2:30. "All right," said Uncle Doll. "We'll see what happens at 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. I hope she doesn't do anything foolish when she's released from doll state." Kate did not move Mimi from her desk. All the next day, Annabelle watched both Mimi and the clock. She expected just about anything to happen at 2:30, especially since the Palmers had decided to spend the day across town with Kate and Nora's cousins. So the house was empty of humans. The very last thing Annabelle expected Mimi to do was nothing. But that was what happened at 2:30. Nothing. "Are you sure Kate's clock said 2:30 yesterday?" Uncle Doll said to Tiffany. "Positive." The dolls watched Mimi for another hour, and still nothing happened. She lay on Kate's desk in the position in which Kate had dropped her, an arm flung over her head, one leg across the other. When Kate went to bed that night, Mimi continued to lie motionless on the desk. She was still there in the morning. As soon as the Palmers had left the house, the dolls and Tiffany and her parents once again gathered in the parlor and regarded Mimi. "What do you think?" asked Annabelle in an awed whisper. "It's been lots longer than 24 hours. "She hasn't moved a muscle," said Auntie Sarah softly. "Maybe she got hurt when she jumped off the shelf," said Bobby. "She doesn't look hurt," replied Mama. "I don't see any cracks. She's all in one piece." After this, the dolls were quiet for a very long time. Finally, Annabelle decided to say the scary thing she had been thinking. "Do you think she could be in PDS?" Nanny gasped, and her hand flew to her mouth. Annabelle glanced at Tiffany. The girls were talking to one another again, but in a cautious way, because they had not yet discussed their fight. "PDS," said Tiffany in a tiny voice. "I don't know. How can you tell if someone's in PDS?" "Let's go poke her," said Bobby brightly. "Bobby?" admonished Nanny. "Well, somebody has to take a look at her," he said. Reluctantly, the grown-ups agreed, and in the end, everyone except Nanny and baby Betsy made their way across Kate's room to her bed, and finally onto her desk. They tiptoed through scattered pencils and markers, a slinky, and 3 china cats, and then they were standing over Mean Mimi. For a moment, they merely stared at her. Then Annabelle stuck her foot out and poked Mimi's head with the toe of her shoe. Nothing. Tiffany, feeling braver, leaned over and shook Mimi's shoulder. Nothing. "Mimi, wake up!" yelled Bobby. Nothing. "Is this PDS?" asked Tiffany. "I suppose it must be," replied Auntie Sarah. "So it's real," whispered Annabelle. "It's really real." She looked at her aunt's solemn face and felt as though a chilly wind were blowing through the bedroom. "I guess it's good for the dolls at BJ's house," she said after a while. "I guess," agreed Tiffany, looking shaken. "What do you think we should do about her?" asked Mom Funcraft. "I'm afraid we can do nothing," replied Auntie Sarah. "We have to leave her right here where Kate put her." And there Mimi lay for 2 more days, in full view of the dolls, an uncomfortable reminder of things they did not yet understand.